In today's episode of the Daily Brief, I'll talk about two interesting stories. I first talk about India's economic outlook, and finally, I talk about SEBI's new specialized investment funds. Welcome to the Daily Brief show by Zerodha, where our aim is to simplify the biggest news in the financial markets in a way that's one level deeper as compared to news channels. I'm your host, Akshara. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you consume your podcast. All the links are in the comments. Coming to the first story. Every year, the International Monetary Fund or IMF conducts an in depth review of a country's economy, assessing its overall health and financial stability. This process is called the Article 4 consultation. Think of it as a health checkup where IMF economists meet with government officials, central bankers, and business leaders to understand how the economy is doing and what risks might lie ahead. For India, this year's report is particularly significant because it comes right after another IMF study that examined the stability of India's financial system in detail. That means we're getting a comprehensive look at both economic performance and financial stability in one go. Also, whether you agree or disagree with the IMF's perspective, it's definitely worth paying close attention to what they have to say. The key takeaway from the report is that India's economy has been growing strongly and looks set to keep doing so. Even though there has been a small slowdown in recent quarters, the IMF expects India to grow at about 6.5% in the financial years 2024-25 and 2025-26. This is much faster than the world average of around 3.2%. By comparison, the United States is expected to grow at 2.1% in 2025 and China at 4.5%. In other words, India is continuing to outpace most other major economies. The IMF also points out that India's inflation has come down to sit within the Reserve Bank of India's target range of 2 to 6%. Food prices, though, still move up and down quite a bit, which is a common concern in an emerging economy. On the banking side, things appear healthier than they've been in years. The share of non performing loans, which are basically bad debts that might not be repaid, has dropped to just 2.6%. In addition to that, the government has been working on reducing its budget deficit, which is the gap between what it earns and what it spends. The deficit came down to 5.6% of GDP in 2023-24, and the current account deficit, which measures the difference between the money flowing in and out of the country, also stayed low at only 0.7% of GDP. Strong growth in service exports, such as software services, has been helping to keep this external balance healthy. The IMF is also impressed with India's digital public infrastructure, such as systems that help deliver payments and services digitally. It notes that large companies seem to be in a stronger position now, reflecting healthier corporate balance sheets, and the overall financial system looks solid. All of these factors create a good platform for India to keep growing and to improve people's lives. But under the surface, there are challenges. One main worry is about the nature of jobs being created. Employment numbers show an increase, and the proportion of working age people who are actually looking for work has risen to 56.4% in 2023-24 from 48.4% in 2017-18. The concern is that many of these jobs seem to be own account work, like small businesses run by single individuals or unpaid family work, for example, on family farms. After the pandemic, there was an unexpected shift of people going back to agricultural jobs, which usually pay less than work in factories or offices. This is a reversal of the usual pattern in developing countries where workers gradually leave farming for better paying jobs in manufacturing or services. Because many of these roles are still in the informal sector, people lack job security, paid leave, and other benefits that come with formal employment. Another puzzle is that private investment has not taken off as strongly as expected. Private companies spending on equipment and machinery was only 4.3% of GDP in 2022-23, which is lower than the average of 5.9% seen between 2011-12 and 2015-16. The IMF also notes that when policy unpredictably goes up, new project announcements tend to go down, highlighting how important a stable policy environment is for drawing in private capital. But without strong investment by private firms, India may find it harder to keep creating enough stable, well paid jobs and to lift productivity to the level needed to reach its goal of becoming an advanced economy by 2047. Interestingly, Indian authorities do not completely agree with all of the IMF's views. They argue that formal employment is growing a lot, pointing to data showing that new enrollments in the Employees Provident Fund rose from 6.1 million in 2018-19 to 13.1 million in 2023-24. They also stress that most of these new fund members are under the age of 29, which suggests that young people are moving into more formal roles. Now, the government points to achievements in cutting poverty as well, saying that multidimensional poverty, which considers things like health, schooling, and living standards, not just income, has fallen below 1% in 2023-24, down from 12% in 2011-12. The authorities add that inequality has also gone down based on a measure called the Gini coefficient. Looking ahead, the IMF says that there are more reasons for caution than for confidence when it comes to India's future growth. On the external side, there's a real danger that the world might split into different economic groups or blocs. If trade between these blocs becomes more restricted, India's economy could lose up to 1.5% of its GDP in total. In a worse scenario, with more barriers to high tech and energy trade and less foreign investment coming in, that loss could rise to 3.3%. Fluctuating oil prices are another concern because India still imports most of its oil, and higher oil prices would make its trade deficit and government finances worse. Importing cheaper Russian oil has helped India so far, saving about 0.2% of GDP a year, but it's still vulnerable if global oil markets become more volatile. Within the country, lower private consumption and investment are possible risks if people's incomes don't pick up enough. And weather shocks such as unseasonal rains or droughts can hurt the agricultural harvest and push up food prices and dampen rural spending. There's also a new factor in India's financial markets. More and more households are investing in stocks, and if the stock market becomes choppy, it could affect how wealthy people feel and how much they spend. This is worth noting because India's stock market value has climbed above $4 trillion, which is over 100% of its annual GDP. To meet these challenges, the IMF suggests that India focus on broad-based reforms that cover many areas at once, rather than relying too much on narrow sector spending policies. It also emphasizes that while targeted measures like the Production Linked Incentive Scheme or PLI can boost particular industries, they cannot fully substitute for more comprehensive economy-wide reforms that sustain long-term investment and job creation. For example, the IMF supports implementing new labor codes that make it easier for companies to hire and provide social security at the same time. It also encourages India to deepen its connections with the global economy through trade and foreign investment, maintain high levels of public spending on infrastructure, simplify business regulations, and keep policy stable so that companies can plan for the long term. The IMF points out that improving public investment management would give India much better results from the money it already spends on infrastructure, which has been about 6.7% of GDP in recent years. In fact, its studies suggest that there's roughly a 29% gap between India and the most efficient countries in terms of public investment efficiency. And bridging even half of that gap could lead to significantly better outcomes from the spending that's already happening. The country's roads, electricity networks, and other infrastructure have come a long way. But India may need to invest over 10% of its GDP every year until 2030 to fulfill its broader development targets. So, if we take a close look at why private businesses have been slow to invest, we learn that uncertainty around government policies plays a big part. The IMF found that when policy unpredictability goes up, new projects go down. Another issue is that India has pulled out of many agreements called bilateral investment treaties over the past decade, which may have made overseas investors more cautious. And data suggests that countries which terminate these agreements can see a drop in foreign direct investments or FDIs of more than 30% compared to those that do not. There's also a clear link between how individual Indian states handle things like schooling, labor laws, and the ease of doing business, and how much manufacturing investment they attract. Improving these factors, even by a modest amount, can lead to noticeable gains in how many factories or plants get built. The IMF's review of education and training in India shows that every extra year of formal schooling can raise a person's earnings potential by about 6 to 7%. Gaining formal job-related skills can boost earnings by close to 18.5%, and learning on the job adds around 7.3%. Good quality jobs are crucial for improving people's lives, and the IMF believes labor market reforms could allow India to create tens of millions of additional jobs by 2029 or 30. It also emphasizes the importance of investing early in children's learning because most brain development happens by the age of 6. Women's participation in the workforce is another area where India has made major strides, jumping from 23.3% in 2017-18 to 41.7% in 2023-24. And measures such as increasing paid maternity leave, removing limits on women working night shifts, requiring safe places for working women to stay, and making sure large workplaces have childcare facilities have encouraged more women to take up formal jobs. Another interesting discussion in the IMF's report is about the impact of artificial intelligence. So, in earlier decades, machines mostly replaced repetitive, lower skilled tasks. But modern AI, including what's called generative AI, can handle more complex tasks that used to be done by well trained people. The IMF estimates that roughly 14% of Indian workers might see their work become more efficient with AI, helping them produce more and earn more. But about 12% are at risk of being replaced by these technologies. Services, which are a huge part of India's growth and exports, may be especially exposed to the new AI tools. The IMF thinks India is slightly better prepared than many emerging economies, but it still urges stronger science and technology training in schools, better digital skills among the broader population, and improved social safety nets to help workers who might be displaced. All in all, the IMF thinks that India's economy is performing well and has great promise, but it will need to fix some deep seated issues to reach its dream of being an advanced economy by 2047. Now, the key to this is private investment and better jobs. But the challenge is that the global climate is changing rapidly with possible trade blocs, oil price swings, and fast moving technologies like AI. Now, the government is already working on many of the areas that the IMF calls important. But further and faster reforms, especially in labor laws, the justice system, the credit market, and public investment management, could allow India to grow even more strongly and create millions of good quality jobs while lifting the standards of hundreds of millions of people. Now, coming to the second story. After months of anticipation, the Securities and Exchange Board of India, or SEBI, has issued a circular on specialized investment funds, or SIFs. This was previously called a new asset class in their consultation paper last year. These SIFs fall under the rules that guide mutual funds, but are allowed a bit more freedom in how they invest and handle risk. You can think of them as a product that sits between traditional mutual funds, which most people are familiar with, and portfolio management services, which usually require very large investments and offer more custom strategies. Before SIFs came along, there was a big gap in India's investment market. So, regular mutual funds let people invest with just a few hundred or thousand rupees, while portfolio management services typically asked for at least 50 lakhs. Because of this large jump, many investors who could invest 10 to 15 lakhs ended up looking at unregulated investment schemes. So, SEBI wants to give these investors a safer, more regulated choice, which is why SIFs were created. Now, SEBI has set specific rules on who can offer these new funds. Any mutual fund company that's already registered can launch a specialized investment fund if they satisfy certain conditions. They can either prove that they have managed at least 10,000 crores on average over the last 3 years and that they've been in business for at least 3 years. Or they can bring in qualified professionals to run the show. By qualified professionals, SEBI means a chief investment officer with 10 years of experience managing at least 5,000 crores, plus one more fund manager with at least 3 years of experience managing 500 crores. SEBI has also made it clear that the minimum amount needed to invest in an SIF is 10 lakhs. This is much higher than what you need to put into a normal mutual fund, and that's intentional. SEBI doesn't want people who can only invest a smaller amount to jump into these funds because they come with more risk. So each SIF run by an investment company has to also have its own distinct brand name and logo. This will help people know the difference between an ordinary mutual fund and a more flexible and potentially riskier specialized investment fund. One key difference between SIFs and traditional mutual funds is how SIFs can use derivatives. In the regular mutual fund world, derivatives are usually just used to protect against risk or to rebalance the portfolio. SIFs, on the other hand, can take on what's called an unhedged short position of up to 25% of their net assets. This means that they can use more complex trading strategies that might make more money but can also lead to bigger losses if things go wrong. Now, on top of that, there are different types of SIF strategies. Some focus on stocks and might take short positions, some focus on certain sectors, and others are built around debt instruments. Now, there are also funds that mix different areas like equity, debt, commodities, real estate, investment trust, and infrastructure investment trusts. Another important feature is the flexibility around how often investors can pull out their money. Mutual funds usually allow investors to redeem their shares daily. But with SIFs, the timeline can be daily, weekly, or something else that matches the style of the investments in the fund. Sometimes you might even have to give a notice of up to 15 working days before you can get your money back. Even though SIFs are more flexible, SEBI has put certain limits in place to avoid having investors' money concentrated too much in one place. For example, if a debt security is rated AAA, an SIF can put up to 20% of its net assets in it. But if the rating is only AA, the limit drops to 16%. And it even goes down to 12% for debt rated A or below. Now, on top of that, SIFs can't invest more than 25% of their net assets in debt from a single business sector. On the equity side, SIFs can buy up to 15% of a company's voting shares compared to only 10% for normal mutual funds. In addition to that, each SIF can also invest up to 15% of its net assets in the shares of a single company. This gives the fund managers more room to make bigger moves on certain stocks or sectors while still having some boundary for risk control. There's also a rule about keeping the minimum investment at 10 lakhs. The total value of your investment has to stay above that figure, unless the drop is purely because of the market going down. If your investment slips below 10 lakhs for that reason, it's called a passive breach. So you don't have to top it back up, but if you want to redeem some of your money at this stage, you have to redeem all of it. So once you go below 10 lakhs by market movement, you can continue to hold as is or sell out completely, but you can't only redeem a part of it. There's also a new risk disclosure system called a risk band, which will show 5 levels of risk from the lowest to the highest. This is meant to help investors gauge whether they're ready for the level of risk that each SIF is taking. AMFI, which is the Association of Mutual Funds in India, will set the exact standards by March 31st, 2025. Also, every 2 months, SIFs will reveal the details of their portfolios, including any derivatives they hold. So, anyone interested will be able to find this information on both the fund company's website and AMFI's website. So, if you're a distributor of mutual funds who wants to sell these specialized investment funds, you will have to pass a certification exam called the NISM Series 8 Common Derivative Certification Exam. This is SEBI's way of making sure that the people who guide others into these more advanced products know what they're talking about. Now, when it comes to advertising, SEBI requires all marketing materials for SIFs to include a clear warning that these investments can carry higher risks, including potential loss of capital, liquidity risk, and market volatility. In other words, people need to know that they're not dealing with a typical mutual fund. The new rules for SIFs will become effective from April 1st, 2025, so it might be a while before we see these products out in the market. But for anyone who has more than 10 lakhs to invest and wants something more flexible than a normal mutual fund, SIFs might be something to watch closely. Now coming to the tidbits for the day. Number 1. The Indian government has appointed Finance Secretary Tuin Kanta Pandey as the new chairman of the Securities and Exchange Board of India, or SEBI, for a 3-year term, succeeding Madhavi Puri Booch, whose tenure ends on February 28, 2025. Booch, who led SEBI for 3 years, introduced tighter derivative market regulations and promoted safer small investments. Pandey, who is a 1987 batch IAS officer, previously served as a finance secretary and a secretary of the Department of Revenue. Number 2. The government has unveiled Bharat Ports Global, which is a consortium of India Ports Global, or IPGL, Sagarmala Development Corporation, SDCL, and Indian Port Rail and Ropeway Corporation, IPRCL, to expand India's footprint in global port operations. The initiative focuses on key trade corridors, including the 7,200 kilometer long International North-South Transport Corridor, INSTC, and the India-Middle East-Europe Economic Corridor, or IMEC. Number 3. India's real GDP grew 6.2% in Q3 FY25, recovering from a 7-quarter low of 5.4% in Q2 FY25, according to data from the National Statistics Office, or NSO. The rebound was driven by 8.6% growth in the construction sector, followed by 7.2% in financial, real estate, and professional services, and 6.4% in trade, hotels, transport, and communication. Private financial consumption expenditure, or PFCE, rose 7.6%, indicating improved consumer demand. The government revised its FY25 GDP growth projection to 6.5% from 6.4%. GDP growth had previously slowed from 8.6% in Q3 FY24 to 7.6% in Q4 FY24, 6.7% in Q1 FY25, and 5.4% in Q2 FY25 before showing signs of stabilization in the latest quarter. That's all the news I have for you today. I'm your host Akshara, and this was today's Daily Brief. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.